All right, well, welcome to episode 7 of Why Is This Good from the Naples Writers Workshop in Naples, Florida. My name is Christine, and I'm here with John and Rob.
Hello.
Hey there.
All right, so we're going to start with a story that I picked out. This is from The Aquifer, which is the Florida Review online. It's like their online publication. And I found them because I think I was submitting maybe through Duotrope. So I picked a story from them that I had skimmed across when I went to apply, and I saw this one again when we were coming up with stories for the podcast, and it wasn't one that I absolutely loved, but I remembered it. So I was like, there's probably something here. So it's called The Flood, and it is by Megan Baxter. By the time the dogs completely destroyed the couch, it was early spring. The light was a little longer in the morning and the evening. The sun had some force behind it. I could turn my face to it and feel something in the sky. There was a day of rain, cold, steady rain that beat the snow down. That night we dragged the couch and the love seat outside to the backyard, tired of living with those tattered things, tired of flat pillows and torn fabric. We had to pour gasoline on them to start the fire. We waited until it was dark. The gas burst and then snaked inside the forms in the furniture, under the skirts and up the backs, twisting along the wood inside it, slow at first and smoking horrible thick black smoke that joined the dark sky. It burnt up the smell of that winter, the animal's fur and our skin cells, our hair. Joe and I stood back and watched it. The light from the house stretched out to meet us like an apology. We didn't touch. We gave each other space like the one or the both of us might burst into flame too. The snow melted out to our feet. The flames came through from the inside of the furniture, wearing the fabric thin and then bursting out hungrily into the air. We watched it in silence. The fire ate up everything and then gnawing on the bones, the wood, the springs, the bolts, shuddering and collapsing like skeletons in a mass grave, all the parts mixed up. We kicked the pieces that fell out towards us back into the fire. We watched the sparks rise into the black smoke pillar, following the raindrops back up, shivering wet through all of our coats and boots and hats. We walked back up the hill to the bright house. The fire lay in coals behind us, gnawing on the hardest bits. The ceremony of it all stayed heavy between us. That winter had been hard. Joe had picked up smoking again, standing on the porch just an arm's length from the door, as if it might be warmer near the house. When he had quit, I thought we might be moving somewhere good together. With each night he shuffled in the cold, sucking on those menthols. I didn't know, maybe we weren't going anywhere at all because I was slipping too. I started seeing things at the edge of the light, in the shadows. My fear of driving at night was a real fear. I saw things, my death, the death of the dogs, of my sisters, huge dark primal monsters made of the hills and spruce and rock. I was scared of little things, headlights in the night. I had to understand every sound I heard, place it, or I rocked myself back to sleep, trying to rationalize my terror. The ritual of burning the furniture felt like our first attempt at ridding ourselves of those things, casting the devil out. The house was emptied. We sat at the dining table, looking at where the couch used to be. It reminded me of when we had first moved in, all the blank spaces, and how tender we had been with each other. I picked that because I thought that was one of the most vivid parts of all this, for all the imagery, like seeing the fire actually eating that couch up. And I think fire is something probably super common in fiction, the way people describe it. But I thought that this was a unique way to do it. It at least felt fresh.
Sort of reminded me of Jack London in a way. Kind of.
I was thinking the same thing.
Were you really?
Yeah.
Person against the elements.
Yeah.
Yeah, I hadn't read anything like that in a long time. It was cool.
I kept thinking it felt like post-apocalyptic too, because they were by themselves and she was afraid of everything. I kept thinking of The Road.
Yeah.
And how even though they know that the winter's supposed to fade, the spring does not bring much relief.
Mm-hmm.
Well, she says in the beginning, I imagined that winter was like the start of the end of days. All of the good things, the extra of civilization falling off. Just kind of, I think, set that mood.
Right. And it's kind of weird. She doesn't really give a ton of explanation for why she and her husband are living out here in the first place. So you don't really know why, if she ends up hating it so much or it scares her so much that they ended up going in the first place. But I didn't really feel I needed that explanation to sympathize with her somehow.
That was really simple, sort of like how, what was the Edgar Allan Poe we read last time?
Telltale.
Yeah, how you're just you're in the plot.
Right, yeah.
And that's enough to move it forward. It's more than enough, yeah.
Right, she just says, basically from the beginning, it's man versus nature.
It is a hard winter.
Yeah.
Now you're off, yeah.
I noticed, too, when I read it the second time, that she uses a lot of similes and metaphors. And I think those are some of the types of devices that you learn when you're learning about writing in middle school. It's this is a simile. And then everybody imitates a simile. And then I think you get to a certain point in your own writing when you decide that those are somehow juvenile, maybe because they're simple and easy to recognize. But I thought that she did them a lot.
I think she's a poet, isn't she?
Yeah, she might be. It read that way. And I underlined some of them where she, like even in the bit that I read, like she talks about the house stretched out to meet us like an apology, or the light from the house. I mean, that's a simile, but it's done in a way that a 7th grader wouldn't do.
It's not a concrete simile either. It's like an apology is
abstract.
Yeah, it's abstract, but it's something else about it.
Well, you have to interpret both the way the house is doing that thing and how an apology would come from a house. It's not like saying the house was green like a leaf, and you think, oh, a leaf is concrete, right?
It also sort of reminded me of the Lauren Groff story we did a while ago.
Yeah.
I don't know if it's just because it's female in nature and threatened, if that's what it is, and it just has it feels like a horror movie sort of because of that, you know?
Yeah, there's a tenseness, and she's almost like alone in the house. Mm-hmm. And that's the only place that's the only setting.
And the ritualistic burning is just, and you're in the woods, and it had like a creature feature feel type to it that I really liked.
You mentioned the fire before, but there's all the elements, or a lot of elements. You know, there's the ice, there's water, the flood at the end. It's called the flood. The burning, obviously, fire, and so that kind of Jack London, Midnight Zone. You talk about Lauren Groff's story, very nature, elemental.
I like too how it's called the flood, but the way she starts this, it's winter. And so you know there's not a flood in winter. In fact, I kind of forgot that that's what it was called until the ice melts and you're like, oh, this is the real threat.
Yeah, the idea of the ice being under them at the very end of the story was sort of trippy and weird. I had like a dream, just a dream-like image to it, I suppose.
Yeah, it didn't feel like a real scene. It felt like her worst nightmare, like she dreamt it or something.
But it was an awesome idea. I was like, what the hell? Like, I've never imagined anything like that, and that's cool.
Yeah, I think the closest we get is like hurricanes. And if you live on the beach on stilts and the ocean actually comes up. But but this was like, it seemed like their house was the only one that might be threatened somehow.
I'd be curious to see what like more action oriented her writing would be like, because I like this a lot. But I'd just be curious to see if she does more like, you know, dialogue and scenes and stuff. But
oh yeah, there's no dialogue.
Yeah.
I wonder if that's intentional though, because that was part of why it felt so lonely.
Yeah, good point.
Yeah, even when Joe and I, this part you read, Joe and I stood back and watched it. There's not a lot of interaction between the two of them. It's mostly her interaction with the elements, not the interaction between the two of them. So that probably lends to that kind of lonely feeling.
Right. It feels cold. I'm sure all of this is intentional, but it's pretty well done where you don't like necessarily, she doesn't tell you it's lonely. She kind of says like we're cut off and miserable.
It's nice to see where writers are able to kind of take what their story's about and then show it back to you with just the way it's written. Like whether it's with the people, there's no interaction, so it feels cold. And that sounds kind of duh, but it's effective. Right,
because if this was me and I was living in this house and I was cold and lonely, in real life, I might be like calling my mom and saying, I'm cold and lonely, or calling my sister and saying I'm cold and lonely, or like, putting it on Instagram. And whether or not she did that, like that kind of connection is intentionally left out because like Rob said, it like reinforces that whole feeling.
And then it would be funny. Or funnier, I guess, if you did what you said with like internet stuff.
Yeah, if you're like, woe is me, it makes it a lot less poetic.
Yeah, it's hard to take it seriously, I guess. I don't know.
But yeah, she's got her husband or her boyfriend, whoever it is, and then a couple of dogs and cats, and it still feels that way.
Yeah, the couch burning thing was weird. I didn't see that coming.
Oh, I did. As a pet owner, the paragraph before, she talks about them just pissing on it for months. I was like, yeah, it's got to go.
That was nasty.
Probably burn the whole house up, too.
And this person is not to plug this writer, but does she have other stuff published elsewhere too? I forgot to read her bio.
It's cut off on your page. I don't know.
Yeah.
Does yours mention that, John?
I think she's. Page too, but I looked her up.
Well, yeah, when I
first looked her up, and she had I thought she had some poetry.
Oh wait, she was in Miss Moneypenny. That's James Bond. She was in Threepenny.
Threepenny, yeah.
Threepenny, which sounds cool, I guess. I think Jonathan Franzen said something about Threepenny once. That's like where it lit up to
flattering.
Me. No, he said something good about it.
Yeah. Oh, okay.
Yeah, usually he's
not.
Sorry, Jonathan, if you're out there.
Yeah, it looks like she's got other, maybe this is her book, The Coolest Monsters. Whatever it was, I like kind of finding people who I haven't heard of before, but who are obviously pretty good writers. Mm-hmm. It makes me feel like I, too, am undiscovered, There's
Absolutely.
A lot of us out there.
Absolutely.
One thing I think is done well here is it's called the flood, right? We're all building up to that flood at the end, which is caused by the meltwater and other factors, but like the terrain. But in the beginning, you set up the stream, right? the cabin we were renting sat on the base of a cliff covered with a tall, straight, blah, blah. A swift stream ran between the cliff and the house, always in white water, stumbling over huge boulders. And as we go through, we see that same stream in various states of winter and thaw.
Right.
So it's as if the flood is always lurking throughout. Like you said, you don't always think about it. Like you said, you forgot about it until it came back at the end. They forgot the title was the flood, but we're always living with that stream. And I think that's something, when you do, wilderness, elemental things, like characterizing the environment in that way so that it's even something that changes and you keep seeing it over and over again. It kind of builds up towards that ending, builds the threat of it, it builds the familiarity of it and just that feeling of where you are. I don't know, I'm not saying this very well.
I like the idea that, well, what I'm taking from what you're saying is the idea that, if I'm writing a story about Florida and the story doesn't end with a hurricane, it doesn't hurt to at least talk about the threat that the environment constantly poses. I think for the most part, like, our stories don't take the threat of a setting or a place into account. But if you think of it as like a real living, breathing character, like the setting is in this.
I know a lot of my short stories, I don't insert enough of the setting.
Yeah.
The novel, it's a lot of setting because they're walking in the woods and stuff. But my short stories, it feels a lot of times like you're just in a blank room.
Mm-hmm. Me too.
Who knows what's going on?
It's very contemporary.
That's true.
But, that's why it's so fun to read this. I loved Jack London when I was a kid.
Yeah, right? I think, what's the other one? The Hatchet. Do you guys remember that one?
I didn't read it, but
that was like
I know of it.
Jack London for fifth graders.
Right.
And, Jack London for seventh graders. Anyway, but yeah, there's something that you can really relate to at that age because you know what nature looks like. And you have had that sense of adventure, like walking through your backyard.
Yeah, Lord of the Flies, I still would rank in top 10 maybe.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
I love it. Yeah, I love it.
It's like, I know what I would do to Piggy.
Yeah.
On that island. Okay, so aside from, it sounds like maybe we could all take away the idea of setting. I think I said the same thing, at least for Lauren Groff's.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely.
Maybe that's why I like this. But yeah, so incorporating setting more, even if it doesn't end in some catastrophic natural disaster.
And it seems like more often than not, the nature is going to either be kind of, malevolent like this one, or it's going to be benign. So it's interesting to see if you can find or it might be interesting to see if you can find like a middle ground where it's going to get me, or it's all great, or something in between. That would be an interesting challenge, I think.
Yeah. Even if it's just something you're constantly aware of.
Mm-hmm.
I guess.
Yeah. How do you introduce it in a new way?
And I guess, too, what I would take away from it is, like I said, she uses these similes and metaphors, like, almost too much, but I couldn't tell you the last time I did that, like, overtly.
Yeah, I didn't notice them, but I guess if they're there, they're there, right?
She does it here, like, on this first page. It says, the ice made sounds of its own. It groaned. It creaked and snapped, brittle pops and long breaks. It shuddered like a fallen tree settling into the earth. There were other sounds that were harder to describe, hums, wavering tunes, like Tibetan chants, that sat right between two notes and seemed to be trying to break the world at its weak parts. So there's, like, two right there, but the rest of it is, basically like ice personified, which is another one of those devices that I think I've forgotten about, kind of.
I was having a conversation with our friend James, and we were talking about metaphor and how strong metaphor can be, like whether or not it's better to use what's traditionally called concrete verbs and nouns rather than metaphors. The metaphors can tend towards the abstract. And he thought, he was saying, the common advice is use the concrete nouns, use the concrete verbs. That's what you always hear. But I don't know. I feel like metaphor can be, I don't think concrete's the right way to think about it. I think specificity is
that's a good
way to think about it. Because, what I said to him was a table is an idea. It's not a concrete thing. And I don't think the idea of the concept of concreteness in language is kind of fraught. So I think specificity is more important than concreteness. And metaphors can be very specific in the way, like an apology isn't concrete, but it's very specific. It gives it's a very specific kind of feeling that you're trying to imbue for the way the house looks in that moment, the way the light reaches out from the house. So that might be something to think about as far as when we use metaphors, is being as specific and not necessarily concrete, but specific as possible.
Yeah, I think, too, when we first learned about these things, it was more, like I said, you would compare and contrast based on, like, physical appearance. And it's less concrete here because we're comparing a house to a feeling, and that's when you get, like, poetry.
That's when you get poetry.
Sorry,
Yeah.
poetry.
I mean, yeah, I don't know. It
It's
does
true
read
though.
like
I
poetry.
mean, that's what poetry is. It's looking at things in different new way.
Yeah. Cool. Well, anything else you guys would take away from this one? Maybe not live in the winter in the woods by yourself?
Yeah,
It sounds like not a good place to have a cabin
Or pets. What about
pets.
veterinary care?
or a car. What about the fish image at the end? What do you guys think?
Oh, yeah. That was her, right?
Oh, that's interesting.
She's sympathizing with what a shock it was to her own system to go from whatever comfort or comfortable life she had before this terrible cabin.
Yeah, but the fish is dead. I thought
It's
there's a
dead,
lot
but
of,
it's still brightly colored, she says.
there's a lot of death imagery in here too.
Yeah.
Like something was described as cairns, the trees. I forget where. Like I'm gonna not quote it right, so I'm not gonna try to remember that. But felt like there's a lot of death throughout.
Yeah, that's winter.
Well, yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. So the fish being dead at the end, I thought was obviously realistic, but interesting too.
Yeah. I guess I took that fish at the end, like that was a metaphor too.
So she's dead.
Well, I guess it was her kind of realizing that that's what it must have been like for the fish. Like that's how jarring it was for the fish. And the change in scenery killed the fish. And she, in a lot of ways, felt hollow herself, even though she was still alive, like vibrant like this fish. I don't know. I thought that was obvious, you guys.
What? Death
I
doesn't.
didn't pick it up, but it makes
It
sense.
doesn't make sense. I don't know. Maybe I'm reading way too
No, it
into it.
makes sense to me.
I mean, death doesn't have to be death. It could be change, right?
Yeah, at least in this case. Great.
I buy that. Yeah.
Cool. Thanks, guys.